Welcome to Avalon's Celebrating Recovery Speaker Series. It's Recovery Month, and each week we are chatting to inspiring women in recovery to share their stories and celebrate their recovery. Today, we are excited to introduce our first speaker, Annie McCullough. Annie is an inspirational social change advocate whose energy and enthusiasm helped spark the recovery advocacy movement in Canada. She is the co-founder of Faces and Voices of Recovery Canada and uses her lived experience to embody hope for anyone struggling in addiction. We are also thrilled that Annie is one of Avalon's newest board members. Welcome, Annie.
Thank you so much. So wonderful to be here.
Thank you. Can you tell me what life was like before you started your recovery journey?
Yeah, it's an interesting thing to go back to the way it was before I found recovery. And sometimes I get emotional just thinking about how different my life really was, because I didn't know what I didn't know. But I'll just share that growing up in an alcoholic home where alcoholism wasn't discussed is just a recipe for disaster, because it led me to not only see how a unhealthy coping mechanism looks, and also the denial and any conversation around alcoholism being neglected meant that I had no idea what alcoholism was. And so consequently, I lived my life in alcoholism for 23 years without having any idea. So I feel like my upbringing and what my life was like before was I was asleep, but I didn't even know I was asleep. And then I woke up, and now it's been just, the last 12 years has been all about different levels of awareness, because it didn't all just happen at once. But that I think would be a really good way of describing what my life was like prior to recovery: is unconscious, unaware, and pretty much asleep. Yeah.
Thanks, Annie.
I can go into more of what it was like if you want.
I would love it if you would share your recovery journey with us.
Oh, absolutely. Okay. Well, all right. Well, then we'll go way back to the beginning. So my birth mother was 16 when she found out that she was pregnant with me. And so that's sort of even the in utero environment that I grew up in was traumatic, right? A stressful 16-year-old who knew that she was going to be giving me up for adoption is how I came into this world. And I think that's really important, because with everything that we understand about trauma today, I didn't know how much of a role that played in my life. It took me a long time to understand how big of a role that break, or that bond of it, how bonds of attachment or don't form. So, being adopted is a big piece of my story. Anyway, and then I grew up, I was adopted into a home in Toronto with two alcoholic parents, one of whom was actively alcoholic, and the other one who was more actively keeping things, keeping the house looking like everything was okay while my dad was busy drinking. But after my dad passed away, my mom, it turns out, drank quite a bit as well. But anyway, so my home was very unpredictable. I would characterize it as being very unpredictable and highly dysfunctional because of the alcoholism and the denial that was going on around it. So I kind of learned how to escape very early into things like books and, candy. I remember getting my allowance on Fridays and running to the store. I couldn't wait to get all the sugary and salty and, pop and all the things. And that became the first thing that I learned how to escape into. And books for sure. I spent a lot of time in my room as a child, a lot of time just reading and hiding. And I found I was a real target for bullies too. Like, I was very, I guess, vulnerable just to I didn't have a strong sense of self. And so for a long time, I felt like I was a victim, and didn't have a really good time in school. But I did really well in school. And then I went to high school, and I remember that I made this very conscious decision that I was not going to have the same experience in high school as I had in elementary school, and I was going to do whatever it took to fit in. And as it turns out, fitting in high school is really easy. You just drink and smoke cigarettes and do what all the other kind of badass kids were doing, and then it was really easy. And I don't want to make it sound like it was all bad, because it wasn't. It was a lot of fun, especially in high school. You know, there was lots of parties, lots of friends, lots of fun. And all those things that I did as a child that I loved, like read. I don't think I read a book from the time I was 14 to 37, and that's not a lie, other than what I had to read for school. But in terms of like reading for my own enjoyment, not once, I don't think. And I had played in the band, and I'd played sports, and all that stuff went away. All of it went away, because drinking became the most important thing. And it wasn't even that I knew that drinking was the most important thing. I just knew that my friends and fitting in and doing whatever everybody else was doing became very important to me. So high school was spent one big party, barely graduated, went from being a straight A student in the gifted program to having, you know, I missed almost as many classes as I attended, I think, in my last couple of years. And because of that, I just didn't continue with school. I could have, you know, I mean, I could have done anything. And I think of another way of describing, you know, what life was like before is full of potential, you know, highly intelligent and, you know, very engaged and enthusiastic young girl. Suddenly, you know, all I cared about was hanging out with my friends and drinking, and not really paying much attention to ambitions or goals anymore. I wanted to be a lawyer when I was a kid. And then, you know, by the time I hit university age, I barely wanted to even go to school. Anyway, another big part of my story is the men that I chose to be with. And of course, in high school, they weren't men, they were boys, but they were realistically, from the time I was 14 to 33, I dated the same guy over and over again, just with a different name and a different face, but they were always alcoholics, and they were always, you know, emotionally or in some way abusive, sometimes physically, but mostly emotionally abusive. And my dad had passed away. I skipped over that. I missed that part. My dad died when I was 11 under some very strange circumstances, unknown whether it was really intentional or not, but he died of drinking poison. And as a chemical engineer, I believe that he understood what he was doing, but he didn't tell my mom he had drank this poison. And then, you know, many hours later, he ended up in the hospital and dying the next day. And so I never got to say goodbye to him. It was a very traumatic experience. And because my mom was so, I guess, traumatized herself and so used to not dealing with things and not talking about them, we didn't even go for grief counseling, like nothing. It was just kind of, let's just keep busy, let's just keep going. And, you know, and then all that stuff, like I said, started happening in high school. It was just easy. Of course, like 2 years later, I'm in high school, and I'm drinking and smoking cigarettes and eventually using drugs too. And it was really makes sense to me, of course, in hindsight, that those things would be very appealing to me to get over the loss of my father as well. So anyway, back to the relationships, because I know that they had everything to do with the relationship I had with my dad. Again, I know that now. You know, I would choose these same partners over and over again. And then I started getting these wake up calls. You know, I started having things happen that were, I think, you know, the universe's way of just kind of knocking and letting me know that, you know, something's wrong and you should stop and take a look. And so when I was, I think, almost 21, I got hit by a car crossing the street, and I was on my way to go see an ex-boyfriend who was not a nice person, not good to me, not gentle, not loving and nurturing. And I got hit by a car and I almost died. And I spent a year trying to recuperate and get back to life. And then instead of changing my life and having a true wake up call, I just, you know, I got my friends to pick me up and take me to the bars in a wheelchair, you know, like just kept going with my life the way it was and not changing it. And a few years later, I moved to Vancouver, came to Vancouver in 1994, not because I was trying to leave behind my alcoholism, because I had no idea I was an alcoholic at that time, but just because I wanted to live in Vancouver because I thought it was the most beautiful place in the world, which it is. Anyone who's doesn't have the pleasure of living here, I still believe it's the best place in the world. And in that time, I rediscovered a love of music, which was beautiful. So that's the one thing I would say, that even though my addiction ended up leading me to some really negative places, I became a DJ and I rediscovered my love of music. And for 10 years, I spent my life, you know, being involved in the music scene. And it was wonderful. Again, same as high school, you know, it had its wonderful piece. What was not so wonderful was all the drugs and the drinking and the partying that came along with it. So then came second wake up call. Second wake up call, 1999. I'm working at this after hours club. I'm running it actually with my business partner, and he gets shot and killed. This was a big story back in 1999. If you were living here in Vancouver, I don't know if you were, but you know, it was a big deal. And it was hugely traumatic for me. And it just sort of added another layer to my already traumatic sort of experiences that were never dealt with. And again, I was so traumatized. I had severe anxiety attacks, panic attacks. I moved back to Toronto. So 5 years after moving here, I went back to Toronto, tried to, again, like regroup, try to recover from this thing that had happened to me. And I really believe that the universe was saying, hey, this life you're living, it's not working. Like, stop and take a look. And instead, my friends from high school opened a nightclub in Toronto and asked me to be the DJ. And I've spent 5 more years in like Groundhog Day of just like every single weekend for 5 years. I couldn't tell you any distinctive thing about that time because it was exactly the same thing every single weekend. And in that time, in those 5 years, I met the man who I would later marry. And he was okay with the fact that I drank, didn't care about that, but he was very much against drugs and told me that if I didn't stop, not that he didn't say you don't stop. He said, it'll be a deal breaker for me if you're still doing that. And I was 34 at the time. And I thought, yeah, I gotta stop this. It's ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous that I would keep going with this lifestyle. But the problem was, of course, we all, I think, anyone who ends up in addiction crosses a line somewhere that we don't always know that we're crossing. And that line had been crossed, and I thought I could stop and I couldn't. So I started lying. I didn't lie. I just didn't tell him. And I understand again today that was not a good foundation for a relationship. I didn't understand at the time. I just thought, well, what he doesn't know won't hurt him, and he doesn't ask, and I don't tell, and that's fine. I have made amends to him for this, by the way, so it's okay if he sees this video at some point or somebody wants to tell him. It's all right. I've already made my amends. So also in that time, we moved back to Vancouver. We got married. We bought a house, and I'm lying to him, and I'm still partying with my friends, but I am not partying like I used to, because it's, we are in a bit of a different life now. We're almost 40. He's working on the Olympics. Like, there's lots of stuff going on. So it's not really as crazy of a life as it used to be. But every time I have the opportunity, I'm still indulging in those activities with my friends. So in 2008, I had what I believe will hopefully be the last wake-up call that I have to have in this lifetime anyway. And I had gone out and I was at a work event, and normally I would never ever take part in heavy drinking at a work event, because I would know that I can't, I just never did. I just had all these little rules. I don't drink on school nights. I don't drink at work events, just little things, and I did all those things. I drank at a work event and on school night and all the things, and I blacked out, and it was the most terrifying experience. And I'm not saying I never blacked out before that, but it was the first time that I blacked out and came to and was aware immediately of the fact that I blacked out, because I had no idea how I'd gotten to where I'd gotten to. And I hang on to, this sort of visceral experience of what happened to me when I came to and was told what I did, and just things that I just could not believe that I would ever do and had done, including being physically violent with someone, and just things that did not make sense to me. And it was so terrifying. And I don't beat myself up for this. It's no longer something that I feel is punishment, but I hang on to the feeling that I had of being, terrified, ashamed, scared, freaked out, sick, like physically and emotionally and spiritually sick, so that I never have to go back to that again, right? That can never happen again. And I knew in that instant that I was done. I don't know how. I mean, it didn't make sense. I never tried to quit drinking before. I never even thought I had a problem, but I knew I was done. And I got home and I called the one person that I knew who was in recovery, and I said, I need help. And again, I understand only today how magical those 3 words, I need help, really are, and how that really just opens the door for everything that has come in my beautiful recovery journey. So, I mean, that's what happened before, and what happened after is nothing, really short of a miracle, because the fact that I had lunch plans the next day with the only person that I knew who was sober, like, what are the chances? Only sober woman, I should say. I knew one other sober person, a man, who I'm still dear friends with today. So, I don't know if I needed to go to treatment. I never even tried staying sober on my own. I went to a meeting the next day with her, but I went to treatment. It's what I did. I don't know if I needed it, but it's what I did. And I'm so grateful that it was a treatment center where there were loving, caring people who got me to, stay put and stay still long enough to really figure out what was actually going on. Because like I said, I had no idea what alcoholism was. I didn't go there because I'm like, I know what alcoholism is and now I know I have it, I need to deal with it. I went there because I knew that whatever had happened and led me to be in that place that night was such a terrifying feeling that I needed to make sure that no matter what, I never did that again. But I still had no idea what alcoholism was, or that my upbringing or any of the things, like none of it. I just didn't understand. So I stayed there for 5 weeks. My husband did not agree with my decision to go. He did not believe I was an alcoholic. A lot of the work that I've done in recovery has been around breaking stigma. And while I faced that stigma head on, my husband was like, you don't drink every day. You don't hide alcohol. You're not an alcoholic. And so it was really interesting. So I had to go and just do it on my own without his support. And B, it was really my first, real exposure to what the stigma around this, what addiction and what alcoholism, what it looks like and what it can do. Because I didn't fit his view of what it is doesn't mean it wasn't true. So our marriage didn't end up surviving, which is okay. I know today that it's okay, but it was a pretty hard first year, let me tell you, trying to stay sober, go through a divorce. I changed jobs a couple of years later and got involved in the treatment center that I had gone to. And we did some amazing things in the 3 years that I was there. We started Recovery Day and we started Faces and Voices of Recovery Canada, got really involved in advocacy, and it was amazing, right? It was amazing to take my old experience of project management and in the stressful environment I used to work at as in corporate project management, and utilize those skills and transfer them to actually helping people, really helping people find their way into recovery. So I've been able to, stay in recovery myself, help people as a sponsor, help people, on a sort of one-on-one individual basis as a recovery coach, and then do some bigger, as Bill White, the recovery advocate in the US, talks about, like putting your face out there as being in recovery is like doing a giant 12-step call, because that's what we really need is more people, normal people who aren't maybe what society views as being an addict or an alcoholic, to come forward and say, you know what, I too, me too, have been there and I'm now in recovery, and this is what it looks like. Like, this is the story of hope that I can share, that it's not all, that it doesn't end, and it doesn't have to be under a bridge and drinking out of a bottle out of a paper bag. It doesn't have to look like that. And that you don't, I was so lucky. I didn't have to, suffer going to jail or losing a job or having, things taken away from me. I was able to get sober and stay sober, a lot earlier. And I think that's, for me, a huge part of my message is that you don't have to wait until you lose everything. There are signs, those wake up calls along the way. And if we hear them, if I had heard them, things could have been so much different. So, that's what, today my life is unbelievable, right? I mean, I get to help people, like I said, on all these different levels, and it's not always easy. It certainly isn't always easy, actually. Being in recovery is really hard some days. And it's also the greatest gift I've ever received. So yeah, that's the journey.
Thank you, Annie. Yeah, and I love that you touched on the stigma and breaking the stigma, and that your entire recovery journey since coming into recovery has been focused on that. And just by being here and sharing your story definitely helps break that stigma. So thank you so much for being here and sharing your story.
Yeah,
So if anyone wanted to check out what you're doing now and find you, how would they do that?
So a couple things. So Faces and Voices of Recovery Canada has a Facebook page, and people who are interested in getting involved in Recovery Day or month now events can find information there. You can also find us on Instagram at Favor Canada, FAVOR. And then personally, you can find me on Instagram as Recovery Maven, and my Facebook page is Annie Love. Actually, that's the name that I use for my coaching and my DJ business and other things that I do. And the other thing I'm going to be just a little, obviously Avalon board is my latest and most, most exciting news, I think. And then the other thing that I'm going to be launching soon is my business called Silver Linings, which is going to be helping people who are in recovery take their business from maybe sole proprietor. There's Frankie. We'll talk about him in a second. They can find Frankie on Instagram at Everybody Loves Frank. That's my French bulldog snoring in the background. But yeah, Silver Linings will be launched soon, helping people who are in recovery launch whatever business that they have, taking it to the next level. So yeah, those are some of the things that I'm working on and I'm excited about, and really, really so glad to be here and supporting Avalon, because it's been a huge part of my recovery. I was there every day for the first probably 3 years of my recovery at the North Shore location. And I'm just so glad to be able to give back to this incredible organization. So thank you.
And we're grateful to have you. Thank you so much again for sharing your story. And thanks to everybody for tuning in. And if you missed it, it will be posted on our Facebook page and elsewhere. So thank you.